People like you don't deserve success. That was the text I read while sitting courtside at the French Open, just as Rafael Nadal was serving for match point. My name is Michael Trent, I'm 38 years old, and I had just been fired via text message by Derek Fulton, my boss at Novaris Consulting, a Chicago-based firm where I'd spent the past 6 years building their entire European business from scratch. The trip to Paris. It was supposed to be a reward, recognition for landing the largest client contract in company history, a $12 million deal with Nexura Labs. Derek himself had handed me the French Open tickets during a team meeting, calling me the future of global expansion. Now, he was firing me like a coward, through text with no meeting, no explanation, no class. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't alone. Sitting next to me in the VIP section was Malcolm Barrett, CEO of Lyra Global, our fiercest competitor in Europe. We'd only met once before, but the look he gave me said everything. He noticed the message, and he saw the opportunity. Derek thought he was ending my career. In reality, he had just lit the fuse on the biggest professional shift of my life. And this time, I wouldn't be building someone else's empire. When I joined Novaris Consulting 6 years ago, their European presence was non-existent. No clients, no partnerships, nothing but an empty strategy deck and a lot of vague promises. That's where I came in. I had a background in enterprise software implementation, but what set me apart was my ability to build bridges, not just between platforms, but between cultures. American companies often fail in Europe because they treat every country the same. I knew better. I spent 2 years learning French and German. I took late-night calls with executives in Frankfurt and early breakfasts in Paris. I didn't just read market reports. I walked factory floors, sat in meetings where no English was spoken, then earned trust the old-fashioned way. The results spoke for themselves. In 6 years, I brought in 43 major clients across 12 countries. The combined contract value, over $78 million. Our European division, which didn't exist when I started, was now responsible for 37% of Novaris's total revenue. But Derek Fulton, our CEO, couldn't stand not being the smartest person in the room. He was the kind of executive who took credit when things went right and blamed others when they didn't. When Nexura Labs rejected our initial pitch 18 months ago, he made a point of calling out my lack of cultural sensitivity during a board meeting. But when I turned things around, revised our entire approach, and secured the largest deal in company history, he shook my hand in front of the team, then privately told the board it was his leadership that had inspired the turnaround. I should have seen the signs. For months, Derek had been sidelining me, no longer inviting me to senior strategy meetings, and worse, assigning high-profile communications to his newly hired Assistant Director of European Operations, Trevor Fulton, his 26-year-old nephew with a shiny MBA and zero international experience. Trevor didn't speak a word of French or German. He thought Oslo was in Sweden. He once called a Swiss client German. That's who Derek was grooming to replace me. 3 weeks before Paris, I noticed Derek had been taking client calls behind my back, conversations that should have gone through me. When I asked about it, he told me not to worry about matters above my pay grade. His tone was patronizing, and his smirk said more than his words ever could. At home, my wife Claire could see something was off. "He's pushing you out," she warned. "Guys like that don't bring in family unless they're clearing space." I wanted to believe I was safe, that my results would protect me, that clients would speak for me, that loyalty still meant something. I was wrong. Trevor, I would later learn, had been feeding Derek a steady stream of poison, telling him that I was too aligned with European clients, that my travel was excessive, and that most of what I did could be handled remotely by someone based in Chicago. He painted me as someone who had gone native, as if caring about client relationships and understanding culture was a liability. The Roland Garros trip, it wasn't a thank you gift, it was a setup. Derek wanted me out of the country, disconnected and unable to react, while they quietly transitioned clients to Trevor. But Derek made one fatal error. He fired me at exactly the wrong moment, while I was sitting next to Malcolm Barrett, the British CEO of Lyra Global, our fiercest competitor. I had met Malcolm once at a conference in Amsterdam, and we'd shared a polite 5-minute chat about vendor risk management. But he remembered me. And more importantly, he saw an opening. I didn't say much at first. I was still reeling from the text, not just the firing, but the tone. Pathetic employees like you don't deserve success. The cruelty wasn't accidental, it was personal. Derek wanted to humiliate me, not just remove me. He wanted to leave a scar. As the match ended and the crowd roared for Nadal, I felt nothing but cold resolve. Derek thought he had won. He thought I'd quietly fade out, pack up my office, and watch as his nephew took over everything I had built. He didn't understand the one thing that had made me successful in the first place: relationships. Clients didn't work with me because of a company logo. They worked with me because I understood their needs, spoke their language, and followed through on every promise. They trusted me, not Novaris. And Derek had just severed the one thread that held all those accounts together. As I shook hands with Malcolm and introduced myself again, something clicked in his eyes. He knew. He didn't even have to ask. "Would you be open to a conversation over dinner?" he said. I nodded. "Absolutely. And you're about to hear a story that'll change everything." By the time I walked into Novaris Consulting's Chicago office that gray Monday morning, I had already made up my mind. After that surreal weekend in Paris, capped by dinner with Malcolm Barrett and a job offer I couldn't have imagined just days before, I was no longer the same man who had left for that trip. I was sharper, clearer, ready. Derek Fulton didn't know that yet. He was waiting in the glass-walled conference room, alongside his nephew Trevor and our HR director, Patricia Mills. As I stepped inside, Derek greeted me with fake warmth. "Michael," he said, wearing a salesman's grin. "How was Paris?" "Educational," I replied evenly, sitting across from him. Patricia slid a thin packet across the table. Standard termination paperwork, severance agreement, non-compete clause, return of company property. Nothing generous, but nothing illegal either. "We've decided to restructure the European division under Trevor's leadership," Derek said. "Your services are no longer required." Trevor, 26 years old, smug and clueless, leaned back in his chair like he'd just won something. I looked at him, then back at Derek. "What about my clients?" "They're company clients," Derek said quickly. "Trevor will be handling all European relationships moving forward." I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I signed the papers, shook Derek's hand, and wished them luck. But the real conversation had already started. In private calls, quiet meetings, and one very strategic dinner in Paris. What Derek didn't know was that I had already consulted my attorney and reviewed my contract in detail. The non-compete clause. It only applied to direct competitors within the Chicago metropolitan area. Lyra Global was headquartered in London. As I packed up my office that afternoon, Trevor paraded around like a child who'd been handed the keys to a race car. He sat at my old desk, loudly discussing European strategy with anyone who'd listen. I let him have his moment. By Tuesday morning, the unraveling had begun. Klaus Weber from Christentech, one of our largest German clients, called the Novaris front desk looking for me. Patricia transferred him to Trevor, who spent 15 painful minutes trying to explain why he was now Klaus's new point of contact. Klaus hung up. 3 minutes later, my personal phone rang. "Michael?" Klaus said, his voice strained. "What is happening at your company?" This young man knows absolutely nothing about our agreement. "There have been some internal changes," I told him calmly. "I can't discuss specifics just yet, but you'll be hearing from me soon." That call was the first crack. Then came Marie Dubois from Hollowgate Systems in France. Then Olav Bergman from Oslo's leading pharmaceutical firm. One after another they reached out, confused, frustrated, and increasingly alarmed by Trevor's inexperience. By Thursday, Derek started to panic. He left 6 voicemails on my cell phone, each one more desperate than the last. "Michael, we need to talk. This was a misunderstanding. Let's fix this. Name your terms. You're making a huge mistake." But I wasn't answering. I wasn't sabotaging him. I was just staying silent and letting his own decisions do the damage. Then came Friday. Nexura Labs, the client whose $12 million contract had earned me the Paris trip in the first place, sent a formal letter requesting termination. The reason? Material changes in account management. It was the domino Derek never saw coming. That evening, he showed up at my apartment. "This is insane," he said the moment I opened the door. "You're destroying everything out of spite." "I'm not destroying anything," I said flatly. "I'm just not available to clean up your mess." "What do you want?" "More money. A better title." "I want nothing from you, Derek. You made your decision in Paris." He left looking like a man who'd just watched his house catch fire and realized the hose didn't work. The next morning, Patricia called. Michael, she said softly, can I ask you something off the record? Of course. Did you know about Trevor's hiring before it was announced? No. Why? Because the paperwork doesn't add up. Derek backdated his employment to 3 months ago, but Trevor didn't even set foot in the building until 2 weeks ago, and his starting salary. It's higher than yours ever was. I was quiet. Patricia continued. Also, Derek had a forwarding rule set up on your company email. He's been reading all your client communications for over a month. And he's been telling people internally that you were planning to quit. The trap was becoming visible now, months in the making. Derek had positioned Trevor as a temporary replacement while secretly negotiating a sale of our entire European division to a German consulting firm. And with me conveniently, out of the way. The sale would go through smoothly. There was just one problem. Derek didn't understand what made our European relationships valuable. It wasn't just revenue, it was trust, continuity, cultural fluency. People like Klaus and Marie didn't do business with strangers. They wouldn't hand over million-dollar projects to some firm in Berlin just because Derek said so. That night, I called Malcolm Barrett in London. I need to move quickly, I told him. Is this about the sale Derek's planning? He asked. My stomach turned. You already know. Let's just say we've been watching. But if what you're saying is true, then this is perfect for us. I nodded. Then I'm ready. Let's make our move. By Tuesday evening, I was on a flight to London. I didn't sleep much, not because of nerves, but because I was thinking 5 moves ahead. Derek Fulton had spent months trying to oust me quietly, thinking he'd inherit my client base and sell off the European division for a quick profit. Instead, he had handed me a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Malcolm Barrett, CEO of Lyra Global, met me the next morning at his office overlooking the Thames. It was a sleek, minimalist space, the kind where every detail spoke of quiet power. But Malcolm didn't waste time with showmanship. He handed me a folder. Here's the draft employment agreement, he said. I took the liberty of making you an offer I hope you won't refuse. The terms were better than anything Derek had ever promised. I would serve as Director of American Expansion, overseeing Lyra's entry into the U.S. market, a role built entirely around my unique experience. My compensation included a 30% salary increase, equity options, and full autonomy over strategy and hiring. But what truly sealed the deal was this trust. Malcolm saw me as a partner, not a threat. We've been building our American infrastructure for years, he said, but what we've lacked is someone who understands both worlds. You're the bridge. I signed without hesitation. By Thursday, I was already on the phone with clients, not trying to convince them, just catching them up. They had been waiting for that call. Klaus Weber didn't mince words. Lyra has a very solid reputation in Europe, he said. If you're continuing to oversee our rollout, the transition is easy. I'll have my legal team prepare the transfer notice. Marie Dubois was even more direct. She had grown increasingly frustrated with Trevor's incompetence and was on the verge of terminating her contract with Novaris altogether. Thank God it's you, she said. Finally, someone who actually understands our systems. Even Olav Bergman, whose pharmaceutical firm had been in delicate negotiations with Novaris, agreed to a meeting in Oslo the following week. That deal alone was valued at over $12 million, and this was just the beginning. By Friday afternoon, I had confirmed contract transfers with 6 major clients, totaling over $42 million in revenue. 3 more asked to schedule meetings. They didn't want to be caught in Novaris's implosion. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Derek had no idea what was coming. Trevor, still trying to play the role of international strategist, was flailing. He had no clue how to respond when clients began asking why their emails weren't being returned or why implementation deadlines were being missed. Worse yet, word was starting to spread inside Novaris that the European division was bleeding out. Monday morning hit like a freight train. Klaus's legal team sent formal termination letters for 3 contracts. Marie demanded immediate return of all proprietary documentation. The Oslo firm pulled out of their scheduled negotiations altogether. And Derek. He finally called me. What the hell are you doing, Michael? Working, I replied, for Lyra Global. The clients chose to follow me. You can't do this. You have a non-compete. I checked. The clause only applies to firms based in Chicago. Lyra is headquartered in London. You wrote the contract, Derek. You really should have read it. Silence. Then you're destroying everything I've built. No, I said calmly. You destroyed it the moment you fired me by text message in Paris. I'm just offering the people I worked with a better option. By Wednesday, the consulting firm in Berlin that had been negotiating with Derek began backing out. They weren't interested in buying a shell company. Without clients, the European division had no value. Patricia told me the board had demanded a full report. Trevor had already quit, unable to handle the pressure. Derek was drowning. But the final blow came later that week. Malcolm called me from London. We just got confirmation from the Oslo group, he said. They're signing with us. Full 3-year deal. 15 million. That deal alone was the nail in Derek's coffin. But Malcolm wasn't done. There's something else. I received a call this morning from a woman named Patricia Mills. She says she used to work in HR at Novaris, and she's interested in joining our team. I paused, surprised, but not shocked. She was the only decent one in that room when I was terminated. Well, she's on our radar now. Thought you'd want to know. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Derek had tried to wipe me out. He'd underestimated me, overestimated his leverage, and never bothered to understand the value of trust. In trying to erase me, he'd created the perfect storm, one that gave me not only a fresh start, but the resources and support to build something even stronger. And the irony, it all started with a text message. By the time Monday rolled around, the storm hit Novaris like a wrecking ball. It started with legal notices. Klaus Weber's legal team delivered formal termination for 3 separate contracts. The language was sharp, final, and left no room for negotiation. Marie Dubois, ever precise and principled, issued a demand for the immediate return of all documentation related to Hologate systems. She also requested that Novaris provide written confirmation that no further access to her company's systems would be attempted by Trevor or anyone else from the European team. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Derek called me. Michael, he said, voice already raised. What the hell are you doing? I'm working, I answered evenly. For Lyra Global now. My clients chose to follow me. This is unacceptable. You have a non-compete. You're destroying the entire division. I reviewed my agreement with my attorney. The non-compete only applies to competitors based in the greater Chicago area. Lyra Global is headquartered in London. There was silence on the other end. For the first time, Derek had nothing to say. You're dismantling everything I've built? He finally muttered. No, I replied coldly. You destroyed it the moment you fired me over text message while I was sitting at Roland Garros. I'm just giving people better service. That's what they're paying for, remember? Click. I knew he'd call back, but that wouldn't help him. By Tuesday, even more clients began issuing termination notices. The Norwegian pharmaceutical firm formally canceled their pending negotiations. They didn't want to risk being locked into a contract with a company that had gutted its European operations and replaced competence with nepotism. And word was spreading fast. That Wednesday, I received a call from Patricia Mills. Her voice was flat, heavy. Michael, I thought you should know. Derek's completely losing it. The Berlin deal is falling apart. Their legal team wants to revalue the acquisition, now that the division has hemorrhaged 70% of its revenue. What about Trevor? He resigned yesterday. Walked out without saying a word. The board's panicking. They're demanding an internal audit. They want to know how we lost nearly 60 million in active contracts in less than a week. I didn't say anything for a moment. Also, she added, her tone changing, off the record. I'm considering resigning. If Lyra is hiring, I'd like to talk. Let's definitely talk, I said, smiling. Friday afternoon, Malcolm walked into my office in London holding a bottle of champagne. We just closed the Oslo deal, he said, setting it down. They signed a 3-year contract for 15 million, with an option to expand into their sister company in Copenhagen. I leaned back and let that sink in. I'd worked months to cultivate that relationship, and now it had landed exactly where it belonged, in a place where it would be respected, not exploited. Malcolm sat down and added, "Oh, and Patricia. She's officially joining us next month as Director of HR for European Operations. Apparently she's bringing internal documentation with her, things we might find useful." I raised an eyebrow. Documentation? He nodded. Backdated employment records, email forwarding logs, even draft communications from Derek suggesting you were planning to resign. All fabricated. Patricia's been keeping everything. It was stunning. Not that Derek had planned to replace me. That much I already knew. What stunned me was how sloppy his plan had been. He left a digital paper trail that showed his deception in full detail. Instead of simply firing me and managing a smooth transition, he tried to erase me. And in doing so, he made every client defection, every contract loss, look completely justified. He'd turned me from a threat into a victim, and himself from a leader into a liability. But the final blow was still coming. Exactly 3 weeks to the day after I had been fired by text in Paris, Malcolm walked into my office again, this time without the champagne. "You might want to sit down," he said, but I didn't. "Just got off the phone with someone on Novaris's board." He continued. "Derek's been officially removed as regional director, fired, voted out. They reviewed the losses and concluded that his mismanagement cost the company over $87 million in contracted revenue. It was unanimous." I nodded slowly. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the day this all started. "There's more," Malcolm said. "Trevor is telling anyone who will listen that you sabotaged the division out of spite. He claims you stole client data illegally." I smirked. "Let him. Patricia has the receipts." Indeed she did. Every shady email, every manipulated timestamp, every whisper campaign Derek and Trevor had launched to undermine me. It was all backed up. Patricia was prepared to testify if necessary. But with Derek gone and the division in tatters, there wouldn't be a legal war. There wasn't enough ground left to fight on. Derek had gambled everything on a secret plan that depended on silence. But I hadn't stayed silent. I had stayed smart. And now, the division he tried to steal was gone. The clients had followed me. The truth had come out. All that was left behind was a chair with Derek's name on it, now empty. The Saturday after Derek's firing, my phone rang just after 9 a.m. It was Patricia Mills again. Her voice was tired, like she hadn't slept. "Michael," she said, "I need to tell you something that's not in any of the official reports." I leaned back in my chair, already sensing where this was headed. "Go ahead." I started digging deeper after the board meeting. She continued. "I wanted to understand how this all spiraled so fast, and what I found is worse than I expected." She took a breath. "Derek wasn't just pushing you out to install Trevor. He was trying to cash out." I stayed silent. Let her finish. "He signed a preliminary sale agreement with a Berlin-based consulting firm 3 weeks before you were fired. He pitched it as a strategic merger, said you were unreliable, and that the European division needed professionalized leadership. He used Trevor's title as proof of a smooth transition. So the Paris trip wasn't a reward," I muttered. "It was a decoy." "Exactly. He needed you out of the way. That's why your access was limited that week. That's why your emails were being monitored. He created a false narrative that you were planning to leave anyway. Told the Berlin firm the sale would be low risk, since all clients were loyal to the company, not the rep." I shook my head, half in disbelief, half in dark admiration. Derek had played the long game, carefully orchestrated my exit, manipulated the facts, and aimed to monetize something he didn't build. But there was one fatal flaw in his logic. European business isn't built on buzzwords and LinkedIn posts. It's built on relationships. People like Klaus Weber didn't care about who wore the title of director. They cared about who answered the call at 2 a.m. when their system went down. Marie Dubois didn't sign off on multi-million-dollar deals just because a firm had a shiny website. She trusted me because I'd sat in her boardroom, spoken to her engineers in French, and made deadlines without excuses. Derek had calculated contract value, but he had never calculated human value. He believed those clients would stay because of the brand. They didn't. They stayed because of the bond, and now that bond had moved to Lyra Global. Patricia's voice came through again, quiet but firm. "He underestimated you, Michael. And honestly, he underestimated everyone else too." "What about the Berlin deal?" I asked. "Is it still moving?" "No, it's dead in the water." Once they saw the client list collapse, they pulled out. The legal team from Berlin called Thursday and said the sale was contingent on contract retention. With Nexera, Kristen Tech, and Hollowgate all gone, there's nothing left to sell. I let that sink in. Derek hadn't just failed to replace me. He'd burned the very thing he hoped to trade, and now there was nothing but ash. "There's more," Patricia added. "I spoke with someone on the board privately. They're looking to rebuild. They know the damage is deeper than revenue loss. It's reputational. And they're afraid that more internal memos are going to leak. There's talk of a formal investigation. Into Derek and Trevor, she confirmed. There's evidence of backdated employment documents, pay discrepancies, and some emails that imply client data may have been accessed improperly. Criminal charges. Too early to tell. But they're nervous. I sat there for a moment, looking out the window of my new office in London. The sky was bright over the Thames. Boats drifted slowly, peaceful. But beneath that peace was a powerful shift, a realignment. Lyra Global was thriving. Our American expansion had landed 3 major contracts in Boston, Chicago, and San Diego. European revenue had surpassed projections by nearly 30%. Malcolm Barrett had just greenlit a new regional HQ in Seattle, and I'd been offered a board seat for the coming fiscal year. Meanwhile, Noveris was a sinking ship. The man who once texted me, "Pathetic employees like you don't deserve success," had been voted out in disgrace, and his hand-picked replacement, quietly unemployed, with a trail of burned bridges behind him. I should have felt victorious. I should have wanted to pop champagne and raise a toast to karma. But what I felt was something more reflective. Derek's downfall wasn't just the result of poor judgment. It was the inevitable outcome of arrogance, of believing that titles matter more than trust, that process beats presence, and that employees are disposable. He had forgotten the one rule that truly matters in business, in life. In anything built to last, people remember how you treat them, and I had been treated like a tool, useful until replaceable. But I wasn't replaceable. Not because I was extraordinary, but because I gave a damn. I showed up. I listened. I adapted. I followed through. That's what clients followed. That's what saved me. That's what Derek never understood. 6 months had passed since that text message in Paris. 6 months that felt like a lifetime. Lyra Global was no longer the underdog in American consulting. We had closed 14 major accounts, expanded our European footprint, and opened satellite offices in Boston and Seattle. Our reputation had soared, not because of flashy marketing, but because we delivered. Quietly, consistently, and professionally. And in all that time, I hadn't heard a single word from Derek Fulton or anyone else at Noveris, not until one chilly March morning when my wife, Claire, called me from Chicago. "You're not going to believe who I just saw," she said. "Let me guess. Derek, bagging groceries, at that little market near our old apartment." He looked worn out, thin, gray, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said honestly. "I really am." Because I wasn't angry anymore, not even vindictive. Derek's collapse hadn't brought me joy, but it had brought me clarity. He'd tried to ruin me. He had weaponized his title, exploited his position, and underestimated every person around him. But in doing so, he exposed who he truly was. And once that curtain dropped, there was no rebuilding the illusion. Not to clients, not to his team, not even to himself. That's what made it final. Not the revenue losses, not the firing, not even Trevor's quiet disappearance from LinkedIn. It was the complete erosion of trust. And without trust, no leader can lead. Back in London, I sat down with Malcolm Barrett to review our quarterly reports. Revenue had climbed 34% year over year. Our client retention rate was the highest in company history, and perhaps most importantly, we were gaining traction in the pharmaceutical and logistics sectors, industries Noveris once considered untouchable. "It's remarkable," Malcolm said, skimming through the numbers. "You've rebuilt more in 6 months than some people manage in 10 years. "It wasn't just me," I replied. "Clients were ready to move. They just needed someone to hold the door open." He looked up and nodded. "And they needed to know someone would be standing on the other side of it when they walked through." Later that week, we got news that made everything feel strangely poetic. Klaus Weber, our steadfast client from Kristen Tech, had begun referring us to 2 companies in Munich, both of whom were former Noveris targets. The Norwegian pharmaceutical group had just greenlit a deal that would bring an additional $7 million in yearly revenue. Marie Dubois had signed a 3-year renewal with Lyra, expanding her contract scope to include 3 other subsidiaries. The ripple effect was real. Derek's text had triggered a shift in the market that he never anticipated. Not just a shift in contracts, but a shift in loyalty. And then came the final update from Patricia Mills. She'd officially joined Lyra as our new director of HR for European operations. Her transition was seamless, and her knowledge of Noveris's inner workings had proven invaluable in onboarding clients and clearing up legal misunderstandings. but what she told me over lunch one afternoon sealed the final chapter in my mind. "Michael," she said, sipping her tea, "you should know something. The board did a post-mortem on Derek's last year. Turns out, he inflated performance numbers, withheld critical risk reports, and covered up a whistleblower complaint related to Trevor's early access to confidential client data. If you hadn't left when you did, they might have pinned it on you." I blinked. "They really would have gone that far?" She nodded. "He built a fortress of smoke and mirrors. But once one wall fell, it all came crashing down." I sat with that for a moment, then smiled. "Well, thank you for being the one to light the match." She laughed. "No, thank you for showing that some exits aren't defeats. They're invitations." And she was right. Sometimes the worst day of your career, that text, that insult, that betrayal, turns out to be the most important. Not because of what it takes from you, but because of what it frees you to build. In the spring, Claire joined me in London. We found a quiet house in Hampstead, far from the noise, close to the park. We started talking seriously about kids again, something we hadn't dared to imagine back when our lives revolved around Derek's chaos. And in June, we attended Roland Garros again. This time, I watched from the hospitality suite that Lyra Global had just purchased. I sipped wine, shook hands with new partners, and watched Rafael Nadal lift the trophy, his 14th French Open title. As the crowd cheered, I thought back to the year before, to the man I had been, confused, betrayed, staring at a glowing screen in disbelief. That text message was meant to end my career. Instead, it became the moment I started writing my own story, on my terms. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that would last. 1 year after that brutal text message in Paris, I stood in the very same stadium, this time not as a discarded employee, but as a guest of honor. Lyra Global had secured a hospitality suite overlooking the court, and as I watched Rafael Nadal raise his 14th French Open trophy, I couldn't help but smile. I thought about everything that had happened since the betrayal, the lies, the cold silence that followed being tossed aside. But I also thought about what came next, the opportunity to rebuild, not just my career, but my sense of worth, to surround myself with people who respected substance over show, loyalty over leverage. Derek's attempt to end my career became the spark that reignited my future. And the life I have now, it's built on trust, not titles. Sometimes, what feels like the end is really a disguised beginning. You may be discarded, overlooked, or betrayed, but your value doesn't disappear just because someone else fails to see it. When you're treated like you're replaceable, remember you're not. Experience, integrity, and human connection can't be copied. If you've ever been pushed aside unfairly, or found unexpected strength after a setback, share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and second chances. You never know. The next story might be yours.